Hi, I'm Edwin Rutsch, Director of the Center for Building a Culture of Empathy, and this is our Dialogues on Building a Culture of Empathy. And today I'm here with David Rakel. Thanks for joining me for this discussion.
My pleasure, Edwin. Thanks for talking with me.
So I just wanted to introduce you. You're a medical doctor, and looking at your bio, it's you say from 2001 to 2017, you were the founder and director of the University of Wisconsin Integrative Medicine program, and that was for 16 years. And then last year, you became professor and chair of the Department of Family and Community Medicine at the University of New Mexico School of Medicine in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And you're also the founder and editor of the Integrative Medicine. I guess, is that a book or a magazine? Or
it's a medical reference text.
Oh, medical reference text. Okay.
And clinicians.
Oh, and you're also the author of this book, Compassionate Connection, The Healing Power of Empathy and Mindful Listening. And that's what we wanted to talk about. Is there more by way of introduction that you'd like to say about yourself before we jump into the book?
Oh, yeah, thank you for that nice summary. Before going into academic medicine, I spent 5 years in rural Idaho being a country doctor. And my patients there taught me the most than any textbook ever could have. And actually, it was those 5 years of just being out in rural practice that taught me the most about this subject. And so I just wanted to give a little shout out to my patients in Driggs, Idaho, who are the wisest teachers of all.
So your teacher is being out there, a country doctor in rural America, and being taught by your patients there about the importance of compassion and empathy, sounds like, and listening.
Yeah. I mean, the beautiful thing about being a small town doc is that everybody knows everything about everybody. And the going joke was that you didn't need to use the blinker on your car because everybody already knew where you were going. When you're dealing with how complex systems heal, having that background into what people's lives are like really allows you to be more effective at getting at the root of any condition.
Oh, okay, so you're really getting to know people in depth then. It's not such a distance like you might have in a big city where you don't know the person and they're just coming in. You just get to know them for, whatever, few minutes or half an hour or something. That you're saying that in the community, you really got to know your patients really in depth, really, personally, right. Perhaps.
Yeah, and that's why the research shows that if you have an ongoing therapeutic relationship with someone you care for, there's a 13-fold return on investment. Because if I know Edwin beyond his parts, I know really what's going on that allows us to maybe not slap a pill on every ill, but we really look at the underlying process so we can use the medications when needed. But sometimes it's not about the medications. Maybe someone just needs to forgive someone or let go of a past hurt. And so that's where the value comes in knowing someone beyond their broken parts.
Mm-hmm. Well, from kind of my summary of your book, and let me know if this is accurate, that it has two parts, part one and part two, and there's, multiple chapters under each part. So part one is sort of like saying, hey, connection is important, and kind of goes through the importance of connection. And part two is more like, how do we make connection? I don't know. Would that be an essence, or is there more to it? Yeah,
that's pretty good. The part one, as you mentioned, is about the science, because there's actually quite a bit of science on why this is important. And we go all into the mind, body, and the science of connection. And you're right, the second half is, okay, if there's some good science behind this, how do we do it? And can it be taught? Can we reproduce it? How do we create a new expertise in salutogenesis, which is the genesis and creation of health and healing outcomes, rather than just focusing on pathogenesis, which is the source of or the creation of disease and suffering. So one's a little bit more fun than the other in my mind. I always like to try and pull out what's right with people instead of just labeling them with a lot of different problems or disease states.
Yeah, so that's what something that jumped out at me too was, seeing that with the integrative medicine that you're looking at that word. It's a big word there. It's hard to pronounce. How do you say it? Genesis, the
salutogenesis.
Salutogenesis. Yeah, it seems like it could have been an easier word for it.
I know.
But it's really, it's like looking at how do we create an environment so that it sounds like so that that supports health and well-being instead of just when the problems occur, how do we sort of dig into those problems? So you're even like heading off problems and perhaps even before they even happen.
Yeah. And that's why I think the science about this human connection is so important. Because if we're going to create this expertise on health and healing, you can't do that without getting to know somebody and understanding the context of the story. And the cool thing about that is we can all be experts. Even a 12-year-old can be an expert in health and healing. In order to be an expert in a fibromyalgia rheumatica, there are all these different disease states. I need to learn more about that specific thing. But the cool thing about health is that I would argue everybody in every profession can talk about in a very strategic way how we can use what we know in service of understanding how complex systems heal, whether that's human beings or our planet or a business plan, however that might look.
So, well, at the core is, if I understand it correctly, is you're saying that empathy and compassion is at the core of that human connection, and so you delve into sort of the essence of both of those. And
yeah, you have to feel it, right? I mean, that's what empathy and compassion are all about. It's feeling. It's being willing to go there with somebody and saying, "Hey, I care about you enough to where I'm going to feel what you're going through." And then hopefully we can come from that and get to a better place together.
Okay, well, that's what I wanted to, is I sent you an email about wanting to talk a bit about, delving into the definitions of empathy and compassion. There seems to be a lot of confusion, around the terms. And, these are kind of subtle terms too, sometimes. And there's like all kinds of, there's even a book out there against empathy. I don't know if you know it, but this is by a Yale professor, right? I mean, top university, saying empathy is this horrible, thing. And it even gets support from, some of the compassion community, Matthew Ricard and so forth. He said, yeah, you're right, it's got all these problems. So it's like, what are we talking about? Like, what are the kind of the essence of empathy and compassion? I thought maybe we could kind of delve into it and actually try to create some scenarios of like, when you're seeing a patient and they have their personality, they're bringing their self to you. It's like, what is the empathy part? Where is the compassion part? Kind of more in the nuts and bolts or the deeper, instead of kind of these broad kind of terms that just get kind of very confusing. So, yeah, no,
I'd love to explore that. When I interviewed at the University of Wisconsin for my first academic job, the dean said, "Welcome to Madison, the town of the perpetually offended." But what he meant was everybody is so politically correct that you're bound to offend someone if you don't believe like they do. And I think if we get into the nitty-gritty too much, we actually negate the beauty of both empathy and compassion, which I think both are beautiful. And then the surface of it, if we're doing both those things, awesome. And I've not read the books that you mentioned yet, but they're on my reading list. But I bet I understand where they're coming from. Is that in my mind, if I was going to keep it as simple as possible, empathy sees us as two different people. That, if I come and I see someone sitting there and they're suffering, they're depressed, and maybe they grew up in an abusive home, and that has led to some chronic pain syndromes, and it's complicated, right? Mm-hmm. You're not going to be able to fix that.
Yeah.
But empathy, by the root word of the definition, means that I feel your suffering, and then there's action to it. And you're a national expert on this. I don't need to tell you, but maybe for the listeners, sympathy is different. I feel your pain, but we go home and, no action. That's sympathy. But empathy requires that we put some action to it. So I always like to ask people, how many people have a loved one, hopefully everybody raises their hand. How many of us have tried to change or fix our loved ones? And everybody raised their hand. And then the next question is, how'd that go for you? Mm-hmm. It rarely works, right? I can't fix that long history of that child being abused, of all these different aspects in their life. And empathy, by the root definition, assumes that we're two different people. That, okay, I felt your pain, now we got to do something about it. And that is a tremendous burden for us to carry as human beings. Because you can't fix suffering. You can be with it. You can hold that person's hand and walk to a better place together. And that's why I like that word compassion. I like them both, but they're both good words. But compassion, two people suffering together, right? Passion to suffer. And how do we look upon that? And I think that's the main difference is empathy, we're two different people. Compassion, we're one. And when I help you, I help myself. And that just is such a healthier way to go about it. And there's some research to support this, that when we looked at clinician affect, not me, the researchers who did this, looked at clinician affect after empathy training and after compassion training. They looked at whether the mood went up and were they more stressed. And sure enough, after empathy training, they actually had a more depressed, anxious mood. But after compassion training, they had a better mood with less anxiety. And
sorry,
please.
Oh, sorry. Oh, are you referring to the Tanya Singer study by chance? Okay, if you want, sure.
They taught the loving kindness meditation. Sharon Salzberg's loving kindness meditation, which is all about doing it first for yourself, and then doing it for a neutral person, then doing it for someone who might be you may not see eye to eye with. And I think that practice brings us all into the same boat. And if we assume that we can fix suffering, which we can't, that's heavy, that's burdensome. And that's why I think we have this empathy fatigue or empathy distress. But you don't see those words used with compassion. You don't see compassion fatigue or compassion distress, because at least from what we know now, it seems like compassion is more energizing. And we can walk through some scenarios. I'd love to do that with you.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so that's why I had sent you the Dan Batson article. I don't know if you had a chance to see that, because we're stepping into. I mean, that's the problem with the humanities. It seems that every word has so many different meanings, right? And then the academics are trying to generate more meanings for to create their own meanings so they can get publicity or whatever around their own definitions and concepts, and it just turns into this big morass. And Dan Batson, he's been studying, empathy for like 40 years, and he wrote this paper. He said, 8 ways that the word empathy is even being used, right? And that those terms overlap with other concepts like sympathy or compassion, or the actual same phenomenon has multiple names. Right? So it's like layer upon layer of confusion. And I think the same thing is true with compassion. And then you get into this situation where it seems like the compassion community, that paper you mentioned, Tanya Singer, the whole compassion community keeps referencing this one paper, which I think has total problems with. I even interviewed one of the co-authors of it. And, it's like you start unpacking it and it gets, there's a lot of kind of holes in that paper. So that's why I just said, I was thinking, let's just really delve into, like, what are we talking about? Because when we start getting into it, we start getting aware of what we're talking about. We're kind of like talking about this, maybe even the same thing, but using different terminologies. And I don't know, it just turns into a big mess. And I've been doing this for a while. I get frustrated talking with just what are we talking about? So here's the situation that someone comes to you and they're feeling in real distress. I don't know, what's a good scenario? Like they feel really depressed. Let's say it's like they come to you, they feel really depressed, and then how do we relate to that person? So for me, you'd come for me, empathy would be they come in, they're depressed, and I hear where they are. I say, oh, I'm hearing that you're feeling depressed. It's kind of like, tell me more. It's like, yeah, I'm depressed. As my partner just left me and I feel all alone. So I stay with the person. I sort of accompany them on their journey and, hear where they are. And they say, oh, my partner left me. I feel all alone. I don't have any family. So I'm hearing you're feeling alone, and you're not, you don't have, your partner has left you, and they go sort of on their journey of be it their pain or their joy or whatever it is, and you sort of accompany them on their journey through their personal experience. And so for me, that is what I call empathy. And also, it's referenced like with the work of Carl Rogers. I don't know if you're familiar with him, but he was like core to the defining empathy within the therapeutic realm, right? That you go with the person on their journey, accompany them. And part of the healing is just knowing that you're not alone anymore.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
So the criticism you get from this, like this against empathy, is that it's like this, it's like for some people, empathy is you take on the depression. It's like this person is totally depressed, and then you as a physician or a therapist or even a friend, it's like, oh, I feel so depressed, because you're depressed, your husband left you, I feel so depressed and I'm so heavy. So for me, that's not even empathy. That's just identification or just any other myriad of reasons that, you have that contagion or whatever. I don't even see that as empathy. Maybe it started with empathy because you were aware of what the person is experiencing. So there's like an empathic connection initially, but then you've shifted into identification or something else, which actually blocks empathy, because then it becomes about you and not the person anymore. So anyway, this is a hot topic here. And I keep coming up because we get these books like Against Empathy, and I just interviewed, and it's coming from the compassion community, these criticisms, and it's almost like attacks on empathy. So that's why I'm sharing that with you, just kind of get your reaction and kind of kick this around a little bit. Yeah,
I could agree with you more. What I'd love to do with you is talk about the process and leave the words out of it, because that's what you just described the process beautifully. Yeah. I want to just tell you a quick story about a retreat I was on with John Kabat-Zinn up in the Catskills, and we did a silent retreat. And initially I didn't want a silent retreat. I wanted to learn from, John Kabat-Zinn about, mindfulness and some of its teachings. And after, initially I was, I didn't want to do a walking and sitting meditation all day, but after 3 days, the teaching came, and you started to connect to beauty in a way I could never explain. I was doing a walking meditation, full moon, under some aspens, and everything just came alive once you get out of the clutter of your own mind's thoughts. And then what he had us do was sit in front of another human being. And after not looking at any human beings or talking to anybody for about 3 days, I looked at this other Midwest dude from Ohio, and we started to cry. And it wasn't tears of sadness, it was tears of beauty. That, boy, that's something special. And then the teaching point for me was, once we started to talk about it, beauty slowly went away. So we did science. We had to talk about it, to study it, to understand how we could do it. But if you really just want to do it, the definitions really don't matter that much. You simply want to be present, give someone your full attention and say, hey, you matter to me. And you matter enough. Do I want to hear your story? And through that story, we're going to open up dialogue. And that dialogue means, here's another definition, meaning running through, that there's meaning that runs through both of us. And through that dialogue, together in that moment, we hopefully come to some practical action items that help us together get to a better place. And in doing that, that feels good. Mm-hmm. And healing is contagious across two parties, whereas fixing or curing is usually one way. And we see that in our students, that when you see something that's very difficult to treat, like fibromyalgia or chronic fatigue syndrome, if I'm just focusing on that illness, that burns me out because I don't have a good drug for that. There's a lot of drugs out there for those things, but they work about this well. And but if I look at that person as Betty or Edwin or John, and I look at them as a human being with a story, most symptoms, most behaviors have a reason if you take enough time to simply listen to the story. And I think that's the process. Forget how you describe it. But that's the simple process.
Okay. So you're wanting to get to the sort of the core of what's really happening and where does the healing core, and sort of describe that core. And what I'm hearing there is when you sat, with someone, after doing that, having that mindful meditation and that you really looked at each other and you were able to, without words, just connect very deeply with each other. And it was so touching that, you just even started crying just from that sense of connection that was happening there. And it's that sense of that deep connection is where the sort of the healing happens, that there's that feeling of depth and connection with another human being. And that has healing properties within it. And that when you start, then you try to describe it, what kind of happened, and you start getting into definitions and vocabulary, and things start getting confused, and you start losing that sense of connection with the other person. So we have that sort of a problem, as well as when you start trying to fix the person, say, well, you should do this for your problem, that again, you start losing that connection. So it's sort of like, how do we have that connection and sort of maintain and deepen that connection? And words can get in the way of it. It's kind of what I'm kind of getting from what you're saying.
That's right. Once we started to define the beauty kind of went away, which isn't a bad thing. We need that science. But if you try and treat suffering with facts or data, it never works. You have to treat suffering with your heart. And that's because that's what we feel. That's that emotion that emotes movement that leads us to better action. And by far, the main determinant of health, particularly in America with all these diseases of excess calories, excess stress, excess sedentary lifestyles, the one thing that will predict health the most is behavior. And right now, 35% of Americans are on 5 drugs or more. And that's because we have a process that doesn't allow us to triage and really understand which patients need this process. Not everybody needs it. Not everybody wants it. An earache, I can see that in 5 minutes. But if someone's depressed with recurring headaches and fibromyalgia, that requires a little bit more of our attention in this process.
Yeah, well, I am hearing about the part that, for some diseases, some things, some conditions need that deeper presence, that deeper connection to offer healing for people. And that I do hear the part where you say, you don't want to get into definitions. The thing is the whole book is all words and it's all definitions. You know what I'm saying? We're stuck. We're not connecting with people, person to person, kind of physical body to physical, being. You're kind of connecting through words, and then these have ripple effects. Like, for example, you're using words like empathic distress, right? Now, within the definitions, there's terms like Dan Batson mentions that too. He says, well, he likes the word personal distress, because why is it, you know what I mean? It's like there's sort of a framing of the terminology in terms of saying, oh, there's this empathic distress or personal distress. One sounds like empathy is at fault, and then the other one is just a person has personal distress, as well as within the compassion community is that there's been this term compassion fatigue, and now they start saying, oh, it's not really compassion fatigue, it's empathic fatigue, right? They're trying to kind of shift this negativity from the compassion community to the empathic community. So we're kind of stuck, whether we like it or not. We're sort of stuck in this verbal, dynamics, because we're writing in books, we're talking through the media and so forth. And it's like, how do we address this morass of what's kind of happening? Because, I don't know, that's kind of my frustration, about like, how do we address that? We can't just say, well, let's just ignore all that, because it is part of the problem in a sense, right? We're kind of this verbal, how do we address this verbal disconnect or something that's creating a lot of problems in itself? Because I'm seeing this problem, like, a whole book against empathy, and it has its ripple effects, that there's like programs that are trying to teach empathy in the schools, for example, and then they say, oh, Yale professor says empathy is terrible and bad, you're going to get empathy fatigue and empathy distress, we better shut out empathy training in the schools. Right, so it actually has effect in the society. So I don't know, just what do you think about all that?
It does, yeah. It's a challenge. I imagine you're in this conversation a lot more than I. My main goal is, how do we train health providers to invest and be good and strategic at how their human relationship can enhance health outcomes? And if you look at the research, that's what this whole book is about. That how you are with someone, the positive expectations that you help them make, the control that they have over their illness. There's a whole array of effects that we can do that have a tremendous influence on their healing potential. The estimate is for pain, for example, whether you're a compassionate, empathetic clinician and do this strategic interaction in a way that empowers someone to have hope that they can get better, that can equal about 8 milligrams of morphine in regards to reducing pain and suffering. That's a pretty big effect. Mm-hmm. So how do we incorporate this self-healing mechanism, also known as placebo, but a little bit different, is how do we stack the deck in favor of the body's self-healing mechanisms through a therapeutic ceremony? And it doesn't have to be in medicine. It can be with your best friend. It can be with clergy. It can be, with anybody. But these are some key tools that we need to incorporate into our process, because there's a lot of value there that can help us do our job better.
So you're laying out the benefits of that connection. When we have connection, that feeling, that depth of connection that you had with that person, where you're even going into tears. Whatever pain you had, it probably was minimized. It was reduced in that deep sense of connection, right? If you're feeling pain or whatever, your pain level probably went way down, and your oxytocin went up, and
that's right.
And your healing, your body healing functions probably went up. So that's the core of what we're talking about, is when we can really hear each other. And not only what I'm hearing there is not only in the medical field with the practitioner, with the patient, but really the larger society, that if we can foster this connection in the larger society, it's going to help prevent some illness, as well as be better for healing as well. And you're just saying that here's the studies of how that actually works, and that, hey, this is what can happen.
Yeah, there's an art to it. Take people who are in charge of a lot of other people. The President of the United States, for example. Shouldn't they require at least some training in a process that allows them to see how we're all interconnected, and how our leadership can have a positive or a negative influence on those we serve? A CEO of a company would be the same way. So this is more than just about healthcare. It's how can we take the science from this that we've explored in healthcare and other professions. Humanities is a good example of this. And officially teach this curriculum so others are more aware and cognizant of how their actions can have a healing influence on those that they serve, if they're a leader particularly, I think. in this day and age, the President of the United States would be a good example of that.
Yeah, well, that's what, we're working on too, is, we're looking at how do we build a culture of empathy, and that's what the essence of it is that it's really how do we foster it throughout society. So in the sense that you tell these stories of people who have had some emotional distress that they've had about their lives and the negative consequences that has had in the health effect, and how you actually listen to them, and that kind of helped the healing process. But it could have been headed off if they would have had a empathic and caring family environment where they could really open up and have that deep connection. If they would have had more of a supportive community. So how do we really spread this throughout all of society, this deeper connection? What are sort of the levers for doing that? That like how do we really bring that in?
Well, I think that's why it has to go beyond healthcare.
Yeah.
Like this morning, I went and toured our youth health services detention facility, where we have a clinic that takes care of 11 to 17-year-olds who've been incarcerated for various things. And I asked them, if we could reduce the number of admissions to this facility, which is our goal if we're going to have a healthy outcome, what would we need to invest in? And the number one was that these kids need some sort of support. They need to have a connection with someone who cares about them. And that's a universal rule for every human being. The next one is that we need to educate our services, like our police force, to help them form more meaningful relationships. And then they told us about how they took us to one of the wards at this facility. And in the olden days, and well, this was as recent as 2004, they had a cage where all the health workers or the detention workers were behind the cage, and they would just bark out orders to the inmates. These are 11 to 17-year-olds. And then they realized that wasn't working, and then that would just lead to more rebellion. So they removed the cage, and they started to go out and form relationships with these kids. And to hear the progress that they made just by sitting down with a suffering 11 to 17-year-old and really hear what they need. Is most people just need someone to care. If we're going to get away from all the definitions, it really is that simple. That, hey, I care about you. Let's explore what's at the root of this condition, and often that requires us to go into the context of your life. And that's why I like being a primary care doc, is if you ask us what's the most rewarding thing about this work, it's the connections. That's what feeds us. And that's why this health thing is a two-way causality. That's what feeds us in this work. And I think is also leading to why we see so much burnout in medicine right now, is electronic health record and some of these other things are getting in the way of this, of how do I connect to that human being in a meaningful way.
Mm-hmm. So it's within the youth environment, what I'm hearing there is that it was really about having greater connection with the youth that was actually creating less stress and within that environment.
The rules are the same.
Yeah.
When you talk about the strategy to facilitate health and healing, it works whether you're dealing with troubled youth or business or agriculture or any situation. The rules are the same, and that's what we try and explore in this book.
Yeah, and well, that's where I think where we really resonate, because that's what we're trying to do as well. I mean, with the empathy community, and I don't know if you're familiar with the Cleveland Clinic and their Empathy and Innovation Summit.
Yeah, they have a wonderful video that we show in our trainings.
Yeah, so the thing with the empathy, it's also a big part of the human-centered design or empathic design community, which is what the foundation really of the Cleveland Clinic's empathy initiative is from the design community. It's saying, if we want to design solutions to people's problems, we need to be sensitive to the felt experience that they have and hold that in the design of anything. So if you're designing a computer program app, you need to think of, is there going to be frustration along the line? Are we thinking of systems within the healthcare? We want to design, when a patient comes into the hospital, what is the patient's experience from the get-go? They're going to have all kinds of anxieties, going perhaps to the medical field. Can the environment be a sense of connection, kind of foster connection and ease and calm and whatever it is that to bring out those natural healing capacities and reduce the anxiety. So an environment, so you're even talking about the, correctional facilities, can they be redesigned? What we've been doing, for example, in the political realm, is we just held our a radical empathy forum, where at UC Berkeley. So we had local candidates running for the California Assembly District. We had them come and actually do empathy circles to talk about how do we create a more empathic society. And so we can bring it into, into the political realm, into the healthcare realm, into all these different fields. But I think we have the same, that's what we're wanting, is we see the potential of that connection and, the mutual understanding and so forth. So.
Yeah, you really, if you want to make it really simple, you just think of what's the end product we want to achieve and how do we achieve it. And I always like to think of Apollo 13, that movie Apollo 13 where they had an explosion and they're running out of oxygen, and a lot of smart people from different fields came together and they wanted to save those astronauts. And guess what? They did. But they had to use a common goal as something that brought their expertise together. And I think we need to do that with health. We call this healthcare, but it's really disease care. If we're really going to create a healthcare delivery system, we need experts to share their expertise from fields beyond healthcare that allow us to come together and have a conversation to understand what our communities need to be healthy. So we need less medications, we need less hospitalizations. And that we have to find a way to pay for. And Center for Medicare and Medicaid are starting to do that. They're starting to say, okay, we're going to pay you for value. We're going to pay you for the outcomes we want to see, rather than just how much diabetes you see. Because if we just pay for diabetes, subconsciously we want more diabetes, because that's how I pay my kids' college tuition. And that's why we need to shift what we pay for. So if we actually found a way to financially support, and it doesn't have to be a lot of money, but in a little way to bring those people together that you're talking about, and have that as a common discussion for us to put our expertise towards and create an action that will help improve the health of our communities, that's energizing for everybody.
Yeah, well, we're looking at the political. It's like there's been this notion, well, politics is about self-interest. It's all, nasty. It's horrible. It's, demeaning. And it's really, I think we need to want to change society. We're going to, we need to go into the political realm with empathy and connection and care and bring those values into. And the politicians are actually up for it. If, like we had, 11 of the 12 candidates, in the forum, and they were like appreciative of a dialogue that wasn't a competitive dialogue. They were using empathic listening, which is kind of one of the core practices, and I think you mentioned it as well. Just using the reflective listening, and one person speaks and you just listen to them until they feel fully heard, and so just some basic listening practices, and they were really appreciative of it. So it's like, yeah, how do we bring it into to the society at large, and how do we work together to make that happen? So I just wonder, with your in New Mexico at your center, what kind of programs are you doing in this direction? What initiatives do you have?
Well, we're being quite proactive. Our dean just gave support for both a faculty and student resiliency task force, so we can address how do we create a community that talks about what gives us energy instead of what takes away energy. We're the only medical school in the country that has required the Healer's Art course, and not sure that's a good idea because it's not for everybody, but Rachel Naomi Remen started this at UCSF, and this is being taught, I think, now up to like 60 medical schools, almost half the medical schools across the country. And this is an opportunity for us just to have balance type groups where we sit and talk about life, just as you mentioned, without fixing it, just accepting it, and then giving that support. And I think if we can start early on in any learner's life about the importance of that, they'll see that as a vital thing that they want to share with others as they get out into whatever field they go into. So, and then, how do we teach this? That's another big question I bet you hear a lot is, can you teach empathy or can you teach compassion? And obviously I'm in the camp that says you can,
yeah.
but you have to do it for yourself first. And that is a key first ingredient, that you can't do this for anybody else until you explore it yourself. And there's a lot of reasons to do that, not only for self-compassion, for self-empathy, but also in order to recognize your implicit or subconscious biases, because we've all been conditioned in certain ways. And at least in healthcare, we're too quick to judge people and slap shut off your acid pump if you have reflux disease with a PPI, which now may increase your risk of heart disease and kidney failure. That is too simple, right? You have to go into the context of that person's life. And how do we teach that and practice that is one thing that I'm really proud of our institution here, but it's happening across the country.
Can you say more about your teaching program? Like what's it involved? What topics do you cover, and sort of how do you approach it?
Yeah, in the book we talk about this quite a bit, and I have a simple mind. I like to divide it into 3 steps. That first step is to pause. And in that pausing, we recognize how our mind has been conditioned. And I have certain beliefs, you have certain beliefs, and in order for me not to project those beliefs onto another person inappropriately, I have to recognize how I've been conditioned. And you've heard the sayings of, what can a difficult patient teach us about ourselves? Which is really teaching this, is what sets me off, and why does it set me off? And how can I set that aside and truly be, step 2, present. First, we pause, we recognize how our own mind has been conditioned. And before we do anything of any importance, whether it's an Olympic diver before the dive, if it's a professional putter before the putt, we all pause before something that has meaning. And that helps us get out of the clutter and pause. And then number 2 is where the mindfulness comes in, being present fully, on purpose, without judgment. There'll always be a time for judgment, right? I've gone through 12 years of training in medicine. At some point, you're going to want that expertise,
right?
But not right at the beginning, right? I first need to pause, look upon you, be present with the beginner's mind, with the child's eye, so I can just hear your story without judgment. And then after we open up this dialogue and we sit with each other for a period of time, then we recruit our expertise in service of that person's best outcome. So that's pause, step 1, presence, number 2. And then proceed towards action, the 3 Ps. And there's an old Buddhist saying that says, action without wisdom is dangerous, and wisdom without action is useless. So if we don't put action to this, it's useless, right? We have to put some sort of action where that dialogue, where 2 people say, okay, where do we need to start? And how can I help you succeed? Which leads us to the second 3. These are the 3 Ys. The first are the 3 Ps, and then we go to the 3 Ys. Is why? Why do you want to be healthy? Or what do you want your health for? And these are deeper questions that go right into meaning, that recruit that emotion that will influence behavior. Me telling you, boy, you need to stop smoking, that works less than 5% of the time. If I ask you what's important in your life and how does your smoking help or hinder your ability to achieve it, then you realize for yourself that I want to do these things because it connects me to those things that give my life meaning. So the first question is why. The second is where. Where do you need to start? Edwin, you know yourself much better than I. Where do you feel you need to work on most now to influence your health 10, 15 years now so you can pursue those things that give you your why? And so where, okay, I need to get better sleep maybe, or I need to eat better, I need to lose some weight, or I need to exercise more, I need to forgive that person who I've been angry with for the last 5 years. You're going to know that better than I. So that's the second. Why? Where do you need to start? And then 3 is who. What professional or what person can I recruit to support you in your health journey? And that might be a best friend, it might be clergy, it might be a psychologist, it might be a specialist surgeon. Who do we need to recruit to create your health team based on what matters to you? That's a new health system that gets away from what's wrong with you in a problem list to what's meaningful to you. There's an old saying that we have to get away from finding out what's the matter with you and find out what matters to you. And that's this process that we need to help unfold if we're really going to shift from a disease-only system to a true health system. Both are important, but we need both.
So it sounds, what I'm hearing there is it starts with really connecting with the other person, hearing them, sort of being present, and then moving into finding the deeper meaning to ground health into. It's like, what is the underlying meaning or values or need? What is somebody really wanting? Is it they want deeper connection with their family, like this sense of connection, or they want a sense of fairness, or they want safety? And so really connecting to that then once you have a sense of connection with that, you can you can take actions based on that deeper grounded motivation and then people have their own motivation for manifesting those values and that meaning, basically.
Exactly. And then we focus on what matters to you. Whereas if I just say, okay, I just focus on your liver, I'm going to do all my liver tests, I'm going to give all my liver medications. But if I don't understand that maybe you're on hospice and you don't want me to be aggressive, but you want me to help you mend some relationships with a son who you've been detached with for 30 years. That's what we should be working on in regards to what's meaningful for that human being. Right now with electronic health records, our patients go into their health record and they see their problem list. It makes them feel stressed.
Oh yeah, that's pretty good. Right.
I mean, so in Wisconsin, we put their health goal at the top of their problem list. The first thing they saw was what was important to them.
Wow, that is really insightful. Yeah, it's sort of like, this is your meaning list. This is like what has meaning to you and from your deepest core, and this is what we're going to support you in. So you're kind of like have a partnership with the person to move the person along on their own personal journey instead of trying to impose a direction that they're going to kind of resist and kind of, and it's going to be a lot more harmony in terms of moving forward. Yeah.
We talk about active and passive treatments. Rarely do people do well just with passive treatments. And a passive treatment is taking a medication or getting acupuncture or getting a massage. All you have to do is lay there. Most healing comes from an active process from within each human being that allows them to realize why they want to be healthy and why they might want to eat more vegetables or why they might want to do X.
Well, that's the other part, is a lot of times people think, when we talk about empathy, that, you empathize with someone, you hear them, you hear what their feelings are, what their deeper feelings or needs are, what their values are. And they say, yeah, but where's the action? And one thing I think people understand is that is really one of the biggest actions you can do.
That's true.
It's like, if you don't do anything except that, you've already done more action than most people, get to begin with. So it kind of gets dismissed a lot that, action is, I don't know what, it's like licking stamps and sending them to your congressman, or whatever. It's like action is seen as some kind of this physical, busy work that you kind of do. And it's really just that basic connection that you're talking about, I think is huge in terms of action already.
And it's huge in the science and the research too. Henry Maudsley, one of the fathers of psychologists, said, the sorrow that hath no vent in tears may make other organs weep. And just the action of being empathetic allows that disclosure to someone they trust, to allow this subconscious stressor to have a voice. And when that comes out, either through writing or speaking, that gives that person a sense of control that, this is how I feel. And then the body doesn't have to sympathize anymore. Because if we don't give that suffering a voice, it often comes out as headache or low back pain or irritable bowel or some other symptom, because the body is saying, hey, if your mind isn't going to ask for attention, I'm going to scream out and ask for attention in my own way. And we see that so often in primary care, that if we just took the action of listening to that story, just the process of listening and allowing that person to feel trusted in another human being to disclose their deepest, darkest secrets and what's most meaningful to them, allows us to be better diagnosticians, more value-based care, and a lot more effective. And it's rewarding for us.
Yeah. And well, you started the book off with the story about that, a woman who had like different health conditions, and the underlying issue was maybe generated from a lot of stress that she'd worked as a prostitute earlier and just felt she had to hide that from her family, from shame or whatever. And just being able to hear that was sort of a load came off of stress. So it's like, oh, I was able to share that. It's not like eating at me, and it's like all that disconnection and is creating stress. And what I'm hearing you say is that it's that stress has physical manifestations, physical health manifestations.
That's right. And a point I want to make here is that's not true for everybody. Some people just have genetic predisposition to rheumatoid arthritis, right? But there is no separation between mind and body. The only reason we say that is because it gives our simple mind some construct. But everything that is here is in here, and everything that's here is in here. And there's this complete interaction. And that's the way I like to word it with people is, a lot of people say, well, if you want me to go see a psychologist, you think this is all in my head. No, I want you to see a psychologist because this is a very powerful therapeutic ally that you can use in favor of your healing. And if you shift the perception towards, hey, I can use this to improve my health outcome, to help me pursue my why, then I'm going to be more invested in going and meeting with a psychologist or a social worker or someone to help me understand how to better use this to the outcome I want to achieve.
Yeah, well, what we use a lot in our work is what we call an empathy circle. So this is small groups using empathic listening. So it's like what you were doing, with the patient, you're being present, you're listening to her, but that we do it in small groups, like in families, like with my family, who's very conservative, and they didn't understand all this empathy stuff I was talking about. But I mediated a conflict once, using empathy, listening to the parties in real time. And there was all kinds of, this was like on Christmas, butting heads. It looked like everything was going to blow up. I listened to one party, listened to the other in real time. And I said, now would you listen to the other person, reflect back your understanding of what you hear them say? And I kept them on track. And then the whole family started gathering around. It turned into this big empathy circle. And we came to the deeper why. I think that's a beautiful, you're saying, get to those deeper motivations, the underlying, what people are really needing or wanting or desiring. And what it turned out, the issue was not about where the gifts were kept and why the kids had gotten into them, for Christmas. The underlying need was, it turned out, was a sense of belonging. I don't feel like I belong in this family. I haven't been accepted in this family for, 8 years. I just don't feel like I belong. And suddenly there was, that was the problem. And then it's like, you belong, we care about you, and the hugs. And then it like totally shifted the whole dynamic, was because we got to that deeper why, I think, that you're talking about.
Yeah. Nice job, Edwin.
Yeah, it was one of my peak experiences. And we've been doing empathy circles, ever since in the family. So it was a real transformational moment, so in the family. That's what we see. Can we replicate that, bring it into the healthcare, bring it into politics, and how can we work together, to bring that training and, skill building and really make it a cultural norm? Because I think with books like yours, you're building the case, right? You're saying, here's why connection is important, and then people can understand that, and then they'll be, I think, more supportive. Yeah. And the thing was going on about, we are stuck in this verbal morass, whether we like it or not, and how do we address it? Because really the compassion community, I'm kind of more in the empathy community, and there are what seems to be almost like attacks, criticisms from the compassion community about, it's not compassion fatigue, it's empathy fatigue. It's not this, it's empathic distress. So that the framing of the vocabulary is causing, some kind of stress. Because, and so I've been trying to address it. That's why I'm sorry, I kind of grab you by the lapel and say, let's talk about this. We're going to work on
this side. I'm sorry.
What's that?
But the interesting thing about that is, I really respect that passion, because it is important. It's your why, right? It's
exactly.
But that's also how holy wars start, right? That if we get into one side or the other, and that might divide us more and more. So how do we find a common ground that allows us to all appreciate a spiritual connection that we can all define for ourselves to achieve the outcome? And I'm not saying that in a negative way. I'm just saying that
no, it's a constructive. You're looking for constructive ways forward, and I would say that it is about that dialogue. I've reached out to the compassion community, and that's why I reach out to you, because I see you as a representative. So kind of in that big foot in that community, is to let's have a dialogue, because that's how we work it out. And I'm willing to, and I've reached out to Matthew Ricard and Tanya Singer and the others, and they won't respond. They haven't been able to have a dialogue with some other community I've had, and I'm still have an open invitation. Let's talk about this. And even I've been with Tanya Singer, Helen Reese from I don't know if you know her. She's got beef with that whole study and she's writing a book now, and I think she's going to be addressing that study. I wouldn't use that study as a core foundation, because I think it has so many holes in it that it's going to fall apart. And so anyway, I say, let's have an empathy circle. Let's bring the community together. We'll have a couple-hour empathic dialogue, and through that dialogue, we can find the connection, the mutual understanding, and a common vocabulary, so that we, all feel kind of like we're understanding each other. So
yeah, that's a good idea. It's empathetic remedy for the problem.
It is for the problem. So, well, okay. So, if we think about a couple of minutes here, anything else you want to say to wrap it? This has been great. Really enjoying talking with you. So,
no, I there are sexy things and there are not so sexy things. And, if you want to sell a book, you write about a new diet or something like that. But then there are meaningful things that I think are much more difficult to define. And it's that grayness. It's really what the humanities try and do. They try and define the human spirit. But we can't often do that with just poetry or just painting or just one other form of the humanities. We have to look at this from a lot of different angles. And it's often those things that are most difficult to define that are most beautiful and most meaningful. And this is exactly one of those areas that we need to keep having these empathy circles to really understand what's the outcome we as human beings want for our neighbors, for our communities, for each other. And in doing that, we will find out specific ways to strategically map out a process that will help us get to a better place. But the first and most important step is just caring, coming to the table, and being kind to one another and saying, hey, this is important, you're important. I may not agree with you, but I respect you and thank you for coming to the table, and let's figure this out together. So that's, if I was just going to sum up the challenges with this, it's as simple as just, hey, I care about you. That requires my full attention. I'm willing to sit here with you if we're going to get to a better place together.
And the book is Compassionate Connection, The Healing Power of Empathy and Mindful Listening. So thank you very much. Really enjoyed this conversation.
Likewise, Edwin. I hope we find ourselves in an empathy circle together one day.
That sounds great. I hope so. Okay. Take care. Great. Thank you.
You too. Bye-bye.